Hello and a warm Collisions YYC welcome to my guest this morning, Miss Alicia Quesnel. How are you, Alicia?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I am fabulous. This will be aired weeks in advance, but we're just coming off. We were just discussing how nice it is to have a long weekend, but yet it snowed and it rained and then it was sunny and then it snowed and it rained. So, if anyone is curious, we are calling in from Alberta, and that is a typical May long weekend in Alberta. I had the opportunity to get introduced, very familiar with your firm, which we'll talk about in a second, managing
Excellent.
partner at Burnet Duckworth Palm'r LLP. And I have to be honest, I love when I look at a LinkedIn profile, because I am a professional creeper like so many of us. You've been there for 30 years.
I have been there.
That has some weight behind it, Alicia.
Oh, good.
It does.
Tell that to my partners.
I will believe that they will be listening to this, and we'll get it out on the table right away. In the world of jobs, we look at careers often, and on LinkedIn, you see the jumps and the moves and all over. To see 30 years, and obviously you've held a variety of roles, which we'll talk about that in a second, just about your journey there. But congratulations on being at an organization and moving through on the path that you have for 30 years. I just think there's something that should be celebrated about that.
Absolutely. BD&P for short. It's a great law firm. And of course, we've got the legacy of our founders, Messrs. Burnet Duckworth and Palm'r. And I had the good fortune of actually working with Mr. Duckworth and Mr. Palm'r. I did not know Mr. Burnet, but, they left a legacy of yes, we can, a legacy of innovation, a legacy of client service first. And that's what BDP is all about.
I love the yes, we can. That's a great, as a marketer, I love a good tagline that sums it up in 3 words or less. That's well done. How long has the firm been around? Of course, I think being a Calgarian, I call myself a Calgarian. I've been here for 24 years, so I call myself a Calgarian, but it's a name I've always known, but not, how long has the firm been in place?
So the firm got started in High River in 1905. Oh, wow. So it'd been a very long time. And its expanded to include Frank Burnet in 1913 and continued to grow. It moved to Calgary because one of the firm's clients was Manulife Financial. Okay. And Manulife said, look, you've got to get out of High River. You've got to get into the big city. So we came to the big city. Like so many
of us, the clients pull us along sometimes.
Exactly. So Mr. Burnet joined in 1913 and Mr. Palm'r joined in the 1950s. The firm has had various names, but it's been Burnet Duckworth and Palm'r since 1975.
Okay, wow.
Yes.
That is some weight to it, for
sure. Significant history, and if I may, we've been at the heart of some of the country's most significant matters, particularly in the energy sector. Mm-hmm. We were counsel to Hibernia. Our lawyers acted in Terra Nova, the Sable Offshore Energy Project, Confederation Bridge. So those were some of the biggest happenings of their day, biggest projects of their day.
Well, those are all names that I think, whether you're involved in the sector, Confederation Bridge, those are Canadian, those are iconic projects that you've heard.
Absolutely. And of course, John Brusa, one of our firm leaders and our current chair of BDP, was involved in the first income trusts and the development of the income trust industry. And, those times, I got started when income trusts were coming into being. Mm-hmm. Income trusts were hungry. There were transactions after transaction after transaction because they had to be fed. So it was such a great time. So we were involved in the creation of the income trust, and we were also obviously involved in the conversion of the income trust back to corporations when the Halloween surprise came in about, I believe it was about 2006.
Yeah, I remember that a little bit. Talk to me a little bit, it's so easy from the outside to not necessarily realize or maybe just oversimplify. I take everything with a grain of curiosity. the impact that something like an income trust, the impact that has on industry and the income that has on flowing capital in areas that then have impact. And it's so easy from the outside maybe not to realize some of the legal vehicles or the infrastructure, the structures that are put in place that then drive innovation, exploration, often are high risk activities that we see now as like, oh, that was this is this amazing province we've lived in. But they go hand in hand. Talk to me a little bit about being there, maybe at the table as some of those evolutions took place and the impact you saw on our energy sector.
Yeah, there was an incredible amount of activity. So what the income trusts did was they were looking for a stable source of income, because that income would be distributed out to the unit holders. And they took a lot of properties that companies didn't consider to have a lot of growth potential, and so weren't being developed. So they took their capital and they started working all of those properties that were largely being ignored. So there was a significant uptick in the production and in the development of reserves that we wouldn't have otherwise had without the income trusts. But again, they were hungry. Once you start producing, you've got a product that's in decline, so you've got to keep acquiring new products. And so they were hungry, they were busy, and we were very busy as a result. And, they were such great vehicles for management teams. One of the great things about the industry that we saw in the first 20 years of my practice was management teams going out together, developing properties, selling them once they get to a certain size, and then doing it all over again. So it was just a host of, growth, recycling, regeneration, just such a fantastic time.
Just those cycles. Curious, your journey when you started your practice, and obviously you sit in the chair that you sit in now. And it's always cliche to ask this in hindsight. Was this always the journey? Was managing partner you think about you've had a substantial career. We all evolve. I always joke sometimes. I'm like, oh, that was like 3 or 4 versions of me ago. I don't even remember that version of me compared to the version now. Did the version of you early in your practice always have this as the target? Mm-hmm. Was it always a trajectory of I'm going to ride the ride, or did it? I'm assuming it maybe twisted and turned a few times along the way for you.
Yeah, I've been here for 30 years. There haven't been that many twists and turns, but I will tell you a very funny story. So we don't do it anymore because it's, I think we would, let me just say we don't do it anymore, but it's called skit night.
Okay.
So skit night is when the articling students get to perform for the firm, and they get to make fun of the partners. You can only make fun of partners.
I think I've seen a version of this on Suits, which I know is TV, but I think this sounds a little bit familiar. So anyways, please go on.
But the other thing that we do is we did video segments. So one of my colleagues and I, fellow articling students, he knew someone at the Flames, and so he was able to get access to a Zamboni. So we thought we'd do it. We thought we'd do a skit, and in the skit, I was sitting in Mr. Palmer's office, and 20 years later, and I was the managing partner of the firm, and he was on the Zamboni, clearing the ice for the hockey. So it was kind of funny. Now he's no longer here, and I'm still here.
So you did. So there was a bit of a premonition around
yes,
that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we recently got in contact, and I'll give you a large congratulations, the Calgary Influential Women in Business Awards that you were nominated and you won this year. I was in the room when you did your acceptance speech, which was quite awesome. Talk to me about, and I hate even asking these questions, but as a female working in law, working in Calgary, was that ever something that was, I don't know, a limiting factor? I hate even asking this question, but I'm curious. I've had a lot of good chats with Amber Griffith over at Access Connects and the work that they do to put on that as a award show, and just talking about that equality and how important it is and how much progress we've made, yet there's still progress to be made, I guess is a way to say it.
There's a lot of progress to be made still. And when I was going to law school, there were 50% of us were women. But now 30 years later, our firm in particular, 30% of our partners are female, but that's actually pretty high for the Calgary market.
Okay.
So it takes a long time. And, one of my first experiences as an articling student and a young lawyer were told to get out there and market. And so I thought, great, I'm going to do that. So I was working on a file and I thought, I'm going to ask this colleague that I'm working with, the client that I'm working with, out for lunch, because that's what people did at the time. Mm-hmm. Well, he thought I was asking him out on a date. And it was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable,
awkward.
Very awkward. And it made me hold back a little bit in terms of, okay, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I'm not doing this right.
Interesting.
And so I think in a sense that did have an impact on, how much I progressed in terms of client development. Things did change. I found that working with the larger organizations, they didn't create that kind of male-female expectation.
Okay, interesting.
But with the smaller companies, it was a little bit nerve-wracking at first. And so, that did have that did make a different trajectory on my career. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I think I'm going to stick to marketing women. Which there weren't very many of at the time, but right. Currently there's so many more women in executive C-suite positions as general counsel. So it's a lot better now.
Interesting. Did you have for yourself at that time? Did you have mentors? Did you have peers? Did you have senior lawyers to you that were there to kind of help guide you through that, or was it a little bit of a figure it out as you go kind of game?
It in part it's figure out as you go, because if you're not the reference person, you're not the person that looks like the lawyer, you're not the person that people would look at and say, you must be a lawyer. You have to do a little bit more work to establish yourself. But at BDP, I can say that I have had the most tremendous mentors and sponsors. It's been such a great platform. I wouldn't be where I am today without having the sponsorship. People talking about me when I'm not in the room, giving me the stretch assignments, saying, if anyone can do this, Alicia can do it. And just giving me the confidence and, the ability to shine. It's been fantastic. And that is so important for a career.
I couldn't agree with you more. Talk to me a little bit about your perspective, and you touched on it. It's words that I'm recently trying, or I've had the opportunity to understand at a more deeper level. Mentorship versus sponsorship, and how important they are, but also how different they are. And you just touched on it. I think it's important to call out. I'm learning the difference more so every day of these two words.
Absolutely. So a mentor is someone that you can go to, you can get advice from. They will, give you suggestions on how you can, go about and advance your career. But a sponsor is actually somebody who is invested in you. They're invested in the trajectory and growth of your career. They think that you are someone who can make them look good, and they therefore also want to make you look good. So it is
I like that. That's a good twist. I've never heard it said that way. I like that one.
It is a two-way relationship. So a mentor, you can find mentors. We have formal mentor programs, but sponsorship is something that just develops much more organically, much more naturally. Someone takes an interest in you, and they see something in you that says, I think this person can do a tremendous job. Let's get them the experience that they need. I'm going to talk about this person to other people. And so that other people, when they hear her name, they're going to know whom I'm talking about. I'm going to make sure that they have the best opportunities, that they get the best experience, that they are up front and center at the table. So it really is a game changer in terms of advancing your career. And it's really, really important to get that sponsorship early in your career. And the reason I say that, if you take, two lawyers, both of whom come in with, they're on par, they're equivalent. One starts getting assignments, one starts getting experience, one starts getting invitations, one starts creating a network. Within a year and a half, there is a huge difference between those two lawyers in terms of their skill levels, their development. It makes such a difference early on.
What would be your recommendation for someone listening and they're like, because you can formally set up a mentorship relationship, but sponsorship is different. What are your thoughts on, I guess, the word cultivate comes to mind. How do you cultivate that as anyone on a career trajectory, male or female, or let's take that aside. It's something you have to create. You can't formally, you're not penciling it it's not a contract.
Yep. No, it isn't. So as I said, it's a two-way street. So it really is about asking yourself, what's my value add? How can I differentiate myself? How can I stand out? What is it that about me that is going to interest somebody? And so you really have to think about those things. And for me, one of the things that I did was I made sure I was around on a Friday afternoon at 4:00 because everyone else had gone out, but clients call then. And so when you're available and you get those opportunities, you take them and you try to make sure that you've done all the homework necessary to get there. But being on the other side of the table, I think you need to actually be very strategic. So it's so easy. And we call it affinity bias. It's so easy to look at someone and say, that person is just like I was. I think that person can go very far and I'm going to help them get there. So you have to look at who you're helping. And if it's quote unquote a mini me, then I think you have to start thinking, okay, let me give somebody else an opportunity. Let me be strategic about how I go about giving these opportunities to people. And it is definitely mindfulness. It's not the status quo. It's making a choice and being very purposeful about who you decide to sponsor.
Not just simply, oh, you look like me, you sound like me, so therefore mini me, versus I recognize values, I recognize competencies, I recognize skills, which requires just a tad more. Our brains sometimes cheat us by going, oh, this person looks like me, so therefore I immediately am comfortable. Without necessarily understanding that we actually might not be aligned from a values perspective or skills or competencies or all the things that you and I both know are what actually matters in the long run.
Exactly.
And I would assume it's also a two-way street. Because it's almost more like a referral. I refer you, you refer me. No one loves better than when hey, that person you referred me to? Amazing. They helped me out so much, changed my, back to you. I like what you said, that little bit of selfishness. And I know the word selfishness is a bit charged, but I sponsored you or I supported you and it actually made me look good because I recommended someone who then was able to deliver on value. I do appreciate saying that out loud though, that it's okay, that it is a two-way street.
It absolutely is a two-way street. Yeah.
So
why would you invest in someone unless you were going to get something back from it? And that's just human nature.
And if you're a leader or in an organization, that is what a good team, quote unquote, a high performing team, which I think is a term that gets thrown around pretty loosely. Getting a bunch of people together and making them really busy isn't a high performing team. Putting a bunch of people together that know who has the strength in what, and like, well, you're better for this and I'm better for that, but together I've got your back and vice versa. That to me is a high performing team. And it's a lot more abstract than I think is sometimes that we want to think it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Talk to me even just about on the context of a high performing team and bringing multiple people together. I would assume, and I know that the energy sector or any scale of business has always been complex, but now we have energy transition, we have First Nations, we have renewables. I can only imagine in the last 30 years, the things you've seen that just require so many different skills at the table, like the amount of hats now that have to show up in the room to tackle these. So talk to me a little bit about just that and the complexity of the change that's happening in the last 5 or 10 years. I know there's always change. It just seems to be accelerated more. There's more media about that change now.
Right. So, one of the things that I really enjoy about working in a large law firm is the expertise that we have and that we can draw on, because my area of expertise is in large scale energy projects. And, that requires you to have people who have expertise in tax and in employment and in banking, in securities, in, commercial energy and litigation. Those projects require very, very significant, dedicated, high-performing teams. And I kind of look at it a little bit like the industry itself. So our industry, the energy industry, has gotten where it's gotten because of the high level of collaboration that we've got in industry. And it's a level of collaboration that you don't see in most industries. But, without it, we wouldn't have the oil sands. Without it, we wouldn't have the East Coast offshore. Without it, we wouldn't have had, LNG Canada. And so the importance and significance of developing those teams that, have complementary skill sets and shared objectives is really what, takes law firms to the next level, takes industry to the next level. So I think our industry has been built on that innovation and collaboration. And that's one of the things I love about it.
I really appreciate the perspective of how important it is. And yet when you think about, there's all this new change, well, there always has been. And it's our ability to collaborate. And whether it's, East Coast offshore or a large renewables project in Alberta, it's still different groups all coming together to accomplish a large scale goal that no one on their own could actually pull off.
This industry is highly capital intensive. And so one of the things that people are surprised when I say that I've been involved in over $100 billion in transactions and projects. Well, I'm not alone in Calgary on that front. I can tell you, it's highly capital intensive. You don't do it alone. One of the highlights of my career was in the late 2000s, 2000 and not late 2000s, early 2000s, 2006.
Late 2000s had a whole dark patch there. So yeah, okay. I appreciate it. 06 was not 09, very different years.
But the foreign capital coming to Canada. And that actually required a lot of innovation because we were getting capital investment from state-owned enterprises, from China, from Asia, from Korea, from Malaysia. And those companies came with an entirely different mindset to what we consider to be the standard in the industry for development. And, they were looking for something different, looking for, playing the long game. And we had to create a number of new structures, and we created a number of new, I'm just trying to think of the word, but just a number of new ways of doing things. And it was because we really had to sit down together to listen to one another, to figure out what are our objectives, what do we want to achieve together, and build it from there. So it was such an exciting time being at the forefront of bringing cultures together to help develop the industry. I loved it.
I really appreciate just thinking about, longer term horizons, state capital different than private capital, looking at things in a completely different perspective and not being able to just go and pull the products or the tools off the shelf that you've used before in past deals, because the participants had back to our values and culture, back to diversification, back to diversity at the table. You're dealing with completely different cultures from the other side of the world coming in. And you're like, this is the way we always do it. And they're like, I don't even understand that way. That's not that we never do it that way.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
That's the ultimate puzzle.
It really is. And it's constructing a framework, and then you put the pieces within the framework, and it's very challenging work. And it really helps me to hone my skills. So I'm known for what I call bespoke drafting. So if somebody wants to do something that hasn't been done before, they may come to me and say,
you get the call.
Yes, I might get the call. And, that's what I love doing best.
Oh, I love it. Oh, that's such a nice way to talk to me about highly capital intensive industry. Yes. How has that changed over the last few years of what seems, and I'm going to make an oversimplified statement. We seem to be averse to large capital projects in Canada in the last handful of years. And that's a very broad, very overgeneralized statement. How has that shifted the industry, and kind of what have you seen, even just compared to what you just described in kind of 06?
Yeah. After 2014, it just became such a battle. So we had to face, the U.S. shale revolution. So all of a sudden, capital was leaving Canada and going to the U.S. And, the ESG movement and environmentalists, suggesting that all projects are bad.
Yes.
So it was a very, very difficult time. And, I can tell you that the Alberta government, for example, was trying to work really, really hard to make things happen. So I acted for the Alberta government on the KXL expansion when the Alberta government got involved, and they were going to put over $6 billion in that project through equity and loan guarantees. Obviously, that was before Biden came into office. So it was such a wonderful project, to see what was happening, that we were going to get to Tidewater, and it was going to open up the markets for Canadian producers. It was just so exciting, and then to have it slammed shut by the Biden government without any discussion. Absolutely no discussion. And most people may not know this, but the pipe was in the ground when the KXL expansion was canceled. The pipe was in the ground. So, just devastating. So yes, it is very, very difficult to get projects built, but, we've got Trans Mountain. And that's a game changer.
Yeah,
so
I was like,
again,
we have to, at least we have something, we have a win to celebrate. I agree.
Absolutely. So Trans Mountain, so that is going to give us access to Tidewater, and just, it's opening things up, which is going to have a very positive impact on price. But the other thing, obviously, is LNG Canada. So, of course, we know that when you're building these long pipelines, that they cost more than people originally think they're going to cost.
That seems to be the trend with any type of construction project. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to cost more than we thought. I'm like,
yeah. So I started working with Shell on LNG Canada in 2012.
Okay.
And they had already been working on it for some time. And again, that was a time when Japan was, the price of LNG was just so much higher, and it really made sense to go forward. And so we did go forward with the Coastal GasLink pipeline and LNG Canada, and I'm happy to say that those projects are being built. The CGL pipeline is, being in commissioning phase. LNG Canada is starting their commissioning phase, and again, those are game changers for the gas industry. And it is really going to make such a huge difference to our industry and to what happens over the next few years, getting access to those markets.
What's your perspective on, again, I love you have such a timeline to discuss the role that government plays, which seems, anyways, we seem like we're in a different phase of that versus even 20 years ago, and the roles of like how quickly, the Keystone XL was canceled without any, just because that was the policy that the government in power decided to make. What have you seen when it comes to, working on deals and working on putting things together, the role that government even played 15 years ago versus today? Is it just more that the media plays it in a different way, or is there a substantial shift there? And good, bad, or indifferent, maybe?
I mean, there have been changes. We know the first Trudeau and the National Energy Program kind of had a significant negative impact on the industry. Now we've got the second Trudeau, and all I can say is that the regulatory pancake that we have in place makes it so difficult to get projects done. The timeline to get a project done in Canada is just it's way longer than any other jurisdiction. And there's so many regulatory hurdles that you need to source, and quite often those conflicts don't become evident until you start a project, and then you realize these regulations don't work, so we're going to have to amend the regulations. And then that is a whole another ball of, it's going to take time to do that. So yes, I think with the federal government in particular, focusing on the emissions cap, looking at climate change as a national problem as opposed to a global problem, that just makes such a huge difference. And as we know, coal use is so high in China and in India. And what happened when natural gas prices increased after the Ukraine war in Europe? Coal use increased.
Yeah, you find an alternative that's lower cost.
Exactly. So if you've only got one leg of the stool, which is energy transition, and you're not thinking about energy security, and I look at reliability at the same time, and energy affordability, you're going to be in a very, very dark place, which Europe was after the invasion into Ukraine. But the other thing I just want to mention, of course, not within a year after the cancellation of the KXL expansion pipeline, Biden was asking OPEC members to increase production because the price of energy in the U.S. was so high. And he was asking his own producers to put more money into the ground. It was just such a shame that, the pipeline would have been built, it would have been functional. That never had to happen.
Are we becoming even more short-sighted when it comes to policy and the rhetoric of the moment and the media drive that the populace seems to create? And when a marketing campaign becomes policy, and it feels like you just said, such short-sightedness of a few years out, and wow, that would have really come in handy. And these projects, You can't just turn them on and turn them off overnight.
Yeah.
You can turn them off overnight, but you can't turn them on. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is unfortunate. And prior to the invasion into Ukraine, we weren't thinking about energy security that much. Mm-hmm. So it has to take something. And why? Why does it have to take something so catastrophic to get people to realize that, that there are other legs to this stool that we need to focus on? It's really unfortunate.
It does seem to be, we sometimes take a 2x4 to the head to learn what's going on. Sorry, that's an aggressive way to say it, but it does seem, and by then it's almost too late because it takes years to ramp up a project that now has been mothballed.
Well, exactly. And just kind of speaking about that is just, I'm thinking about the oil sands. If we could talk about the oil sands for one moment.
It's often a topic that people don't want to talk about, and I think we should. So thank you.
We should talk about it, but when you think about what's going to be, where is the last barrel standing going to be?
Yeah.
And when you think about the fact that oil sands is very, very expensive to develop, there are high emissions associated with the oil sands, but emissions intensity is going down. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, the capital that's required to maintain production, because there's very slow decline rates, the capital required to maintain that production is very low. So
compared to a traditional reserve where the decline rate can be quite quick.
Exactly. Exactly.
To think about the reserve itself and how it actually has different economics.
Exactly. So the economics are very different. So, once you've put that upfront sunk capital in, the oil sands are something that you turn off. That you do not turn off.
Right.
Whereas when prices get too low, your conventional production
you
goes
start
down.
seeing wells shut in across the province.
Wells are shut in. There's no drilling rigs. You can't do that with the oil sands, and so they will maintain their production at a relatively cost-effective manner. So those, I think, are going to be some of the last barrels standing.
Interesting. Which, if you want to follow the rhetoric, it's the first barrels we're trying to turn off. I'm oversimplifying for the sake of the conversation.
But our environmental standards, I think, are second to none in the world, and that is important, and it's going to become more important.
Do you see when you are involved in negotiation, involved in deals, no matter what they are, where you're working with other nations, whether it be companies or governments, the standards, and I have friends that have worked overseas, and they're like, "Oh my God, it was like that was Saskatchewan 40 years ago." The things that they're doing there. Does the rest of the world recognize the quality and the capabilities that do exist in our market?
I wish that they did. I think that I don't think that they do.
Okay.
And right now, I don't think you get real value from saying we are the most, our standards are the highest. We care about the environment. We're doing things to try to make things better for Indigenous groups. And I don't think there's a big value on that yet, because people don't want to hear it. All they want to hear is, you've got to shut in, no more fossil fuels. But demand isn't going away. And
it's a completely unrealistic position.
Completely unrealistic.
In my naive state, everyone I speak to who's much smarter than me in this space, there is just, the quality of that molecule from an energy perspective is not to be, it can't be trivialized. Yep. It still is the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is definitely room for wind. There's room for solar.
Yes.
There's obviously significant room for hydro. And if you're, in Ontario, a lot of their energy comes from hydro. Well, we don't have that option here in Alberta. We have natural gas. And so, but we also have significant resources for wind and solar. Yes. And wind and solar, the prices are coming down, which is great, but renewables require backup systems.
Yeah.
And the
wind does not blow all the time, and it's not sunny.
Absolutely.
Yes. We all know the minus 30 day in Alberta when we got the notification to turn our power down, which everybody stepped up and did. But that was a perfect example of it. This is an abundance mindset, not this or that, because it doesn't work that way.
No, it absolutely doesn't. And I think people really need to factor in the cost of creating duplicative capacity to fill that. And if you're just looking at solar and you're just looking at wind turbines, you might say, it's less expensive. But overall, I think in the ecosystem, it's not less expensive. But the other big concern I have with wind and solar are the critical minerals that are required for batteries.
And more importantly, where we have to source those. So highly concentrated in countries that do not have democratic institutions. But processing for most of those is in China. Yeah.
And so we are actually going to be giving up a lot if we think that we're going to be able to electrify everything, because the geopolitics is something that we have no idea.
And I think the average conversation around electrification, whether it's as simple as EVs and simple of this is the way forward, often conveniently other doesn't take into consideration, or it's easy to overlook because it's slightly obscured, but you don't have to dig very far to realize, this is probably, it's all about the bedfellows that you're going to end up with, 3 to 5 years from now. And that's not very long. That's not very far away if we keep going if you let the rhetoric lead it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought these things up because they're so easily overlooked in the popular media narrative.
Well, when I think about the adverse environmental impacts of mining critical minerals and where that is going to be mined, the fact that, the places where there are no human rights, places where there are no environmental standards, it's not pretty. And we do have critical minerals here in Canada, which we're focused on, but who is going to approve a mining project?
I was just going to say, we're back to our original point on not being able to move forward on large projects.
Exactly.
But letting it happen somewhere overseas where it's not in your backyard, but yet it's still having negative global impact doesn't change the narrative, doesn't change the equation, actually.
Well, it absolutely doesn't. And that's why if we're trying to solve climate change on a national scale, and it's not working. It absolutely is not working. And yet we just keep hitting our head against the wall. And, maybe if we hit a little bit harder, we'll actually get something to happen. But Unless we look at this from a global perspective and deal with it on a global basis, there's nothing that Canada can do to change things.
Yeah, except, continue to make the good decisions that not celebrate what we are doing.
Correct.
But I think back to our point earlier, unfortunately, something big enough and bad enough has to happen. But those are things you can't always walk back from when you're talking about on a global scale, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, Alicia, this has gotten slightly very real, but a little bit dark at the end of this podcast. And I say that tongue in cheek because I think these are conversations that need to happen more often with a little bit more all encompassing, not just the convenient truths that fit my narrative at the same time. How have you seen, or what have you seen? I have a very high degree of curiosity on nuclear, and I've heard some people that I trust and who are much smarter than me in this space to say, if we're going to even come close to reaching any of our perceived goals, that's another conversation on even who is setting these goals and what the levels are, that small modular nuclear approach on a community by community basis really has to be a consideration set when it comes to energy.
It is absolutely critical, absolutely critical. I don't think that we could ever achieve, on a national or a global scale, net zero without small nuclear reactors or without, nuclear energy. And even Japan is starting to look at nuclear energy again after, the significant disaster that occurred. It's just so important. And we've come a long way in terms of developing that technology. And Canada is renowned for its expertise and knowledge in nuclear.
I've heard that before.
Nuclear energy. That, yeah. And so why aren't we out there promoting it? And, first we need to adopt it here in Canada to show
we have
people
we have so many remote communities.
Exactly.
We have some very legitimate opportunities to have real positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is something that we really should be focusing more on.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as you read, you don't have to go far down the rabbit hole to realize this is not a new idea. It's old technology. I think the first nuclear submarine was put into practice in the US in the late 50s. As far as the small modular, and I guess we've all watched Chernobyl and we've all seen those large scale.
Yes.
And I agree, it has to be safe. And it's very easy to say, well, yeah, but not in my backyard, which is a very easy one. And at the same time, it's not Jaws. You're not going to get attacked by a shark every time you go in the water. But after you watch that movie, it does feel like that.
Yeah, well, that is true. But again, our standards are very, very high, and we're innovators, and the technology has come a long way, and it really makes sense to focus on the small nuclear reactors.
Diversification in Western Canada. You've been on this ride for quite a while, and we are a resilient, very ambitious bunch here in Western Canada. It makes me very proud to call myself an Albertan. If you look, if we pull out the crystal ball, which I know is always is tough, thoughts on where you see where things seem to be very positive right now. Energy has a nice kind of floor to it. There's activity. It's very different than it used to be, but I have a lot of friends in the energy sector, and they're kind of full steam ahead in a different version of full steam ahead than there was 10 years ago, but it's still very positive. Curious, if you look at the next 5 to 10, and that's a very short horizon, what's your crystal ball look like, Alicia?
One of the benefits of having the energy sector here is the energy sector is one of the biggest investors in clean tech. And so we've developed a significant clean technology hub here in Alberta, particularly in Calgary. And so this is a place where innovators come. And I think that the technology companies and the kind of the digital companies, they're making a home here, and that's going to become bigger and bigger. And I think ag growth, we're starting to see a lot more. Life sciences, and the airline industry. So there's so much going on.
I think aerospace, biotech, these are things that I think most people don't realize are happening here.
Yep, absolutely.
It's part of why I do this podcast, because I'm constantly surprised if someone will bring something up. Maybe less now after 400 episodes, but there's these little pockets of things that happen here that just don't get in the mainstream. If you're not involved with them directly, you don't know. But there is, when we say, we need to diversify, there is a lot more going on here, I think. But energy is still a big driver. We can't underestimate. It takes a lot of startups to equal one even mid-size energy sector project.
Yep. Yeah, it absolutely does. But I definitely see us growing the clean tech space, and the good thing about the technology is it's not just it may be developed for the energy industry, but its applications are so much broader than the energy industry, and we can take it to different places, and it's I think that's really
easily
exciting.
Exported. Easily,
exactly.
Thinking and know-how is more easily exported than hard goods sometimes, right?
Yep.
Borders become less significant.
Yeah.
And as a marketer, which I have to have my marketing hat on, you said earlier of Canada, or certainly Western Canada, not always being recognized for the caliber and the expertise. Evolutions in that clean tech space might do a really interesting job of maybe closing that, creating a little bit more of an infinity loop to here's what we do here. But the more we start exporting that message and the more people start coming here for solutions, that could be interesting if we're going to run out a 5 or 10 year horizon. Put my marketing and branding hat on. I always think Western Canada has a bit of a branding problem. If you're here, but if you're not here, you don't really know it all.
You absolutely
and that's
don't
on us
know.
to tell that story, right?
And interestingly, I was at the Canada Energy Roundtable on Thursday, and Hannah Thibodeau, who was formerly a CBC News reporter, was one of the panelists, and she had spent the whole day at the conference, and she said, you know what? I had no idea all of this was going on. I had no idea. And we're flabbergasted because we hear it all the time.
Yes.
But she was saying, how come you're not getting that message out to the rest of Canada? What, I've never heard this before. So maybe we're in a bit of an echo chamber. I don't know how to get the message out, but we definitely need to change.
I think you said it
narrative.
earlier. I think there is a degree of, you only hear the messages that you're willing to hear. A good friend of mine is the CEO of Canada Powered by Women, and part of their bipartisan approach is to really share what's the energy message across Canada. And I saw a comment this morning, just an internal email of they run a story on oil and gas specifically, and they lose some followers in central Canada.
Yes.
But they talk about energy abundance and access to affordable energy, and they gain followers. It's the disconnect between, one equals the other. They are together. They cannot hang out separately.
That's absolutely right. It's the three-legged stool.
Yes, I love the stool. Yes, you do 100%. Yes, a one-legged stool looks like a pogo stick, and I'm too old for that kind of thing. I don't know. That doesn't work for me. Alicia, so enjoyable to chat with you, and you did self-diagnose that you're not much of a talker. I would disagree. You brought some incredible value today on this show, and your willingness to have the conversations from the perspective of being involved in the deals and being at the table for as long as you have, but at the same time to hear your passion for what you do. And it sounds like there's no riding off into the sunset for you. It sounds like you're very actively involved in every day, and it sounds the thinking keeps you young, and it sounds like that's on your list.
Absolutely. This is such a great city. This is such a great industry. And, I'm proud to be a part of the industry, and hope to continue for many more years.
Well, we are lucky to have you, and thank you for the work that you do, and certainly the role model that you create of what success can look like from all sides. So thank you. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for taking the time. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you very much.